So for this week's Summer in the Bay, we're going to be talking about human impacts. And it's really important, especially in today's time, that we do talk about this because humans do cause a lot of harm to the environment, but there are ways that we can also help our environment. And we're going to do it a fun demo today using an Enviroscape. So these are used by a lot of environmental organizations to teach people about pollutants and how they end up in our waterways. And so what we have here is various buildings in like a city environment. So it might be factories, could be farms further upland. We have our harbor and our estuaries leading to our ocean here. And so basically what this is supposed to demonstrate is a watershed. So a watershed is an area of land where all those tributaries, whether they're creeks, rivers, lakes, drain down to our estuaries and our wetlands and eventually down into our ocean. And so the Chesapeake Bay watershed is fairly large. We have 6 states within our watershed. It's not the largest in the country. The Mississippi would be the largest there. But this is going to be kind of a condensed version of showing you what we do upstream does affect what happens in our oceans. So we'll go ahead and get started. So the first step of our demonstration for our Enviroscape today is we need to talk about different types of pollutants and where they would be located within your Enviroscape. So the first thing is I notice we have up here in the corner, we have a farm. And so farms do create a lot of excess sediment. So we're using some coffee grounds to kind of represent that today. So we're sprinkling that sediment on our farm. And on the opposite corner, we have our construction site. And they obviously also are doing a lot of plowing. And so that's gonna result in a lot of excess sediment too. So we're gonna put our coffee grounds there as well. So our next pollutant we're gonna add is some colored Kool-Aid, and it's gonna be representing fertilizer. And so on our Enviroscape, we have a golf course located here. Usually you find a lot of golf courses, they're right on waterways because they're very scenic and beautiful. But they'll use fertilizers to keep that nice turf nice and green. So we'll sprinkle some fertilizer on our golf course. And another place you might find them are in some neighborhood areas. So here on the coast, a lot of people live on waterways too, again, because they're very scenic and beautiful, but they might use some, not as strong as fertilizers, but they'll still use some in their lawn areas. So we'll sprinkle that around our houses right there. And so that will represent fertilizer. So our next pollutant is going to be litter. So this can be paper, plastic products are a huge pollutant, aluminum cans, trash bags, and unfortunately these are all man-made products, so they come from people. So we have a really bustling resort here right on the beachfront, and unfortunately not everyone picks up after themselves and trash can get left behind. So we have more Kool-Aid powder, different color, and that's going to represent some litter right around the resort area specifically. And those people are going to go down on the beach, and so you might find some litter right on the beach. It's already affecting our water, as you guys can see. So litter obviously is a huge human impact. Just cleaning up after ourselves can really help our environment. So the final pollutant that we're going to be adding is motor oil. And so what'll happen is oil can come off people's cars, it can come off boats that are parked in marinas, and that ends up in our waterways. And what'll happen is further upland, that oil slick washes down into storm drains, which aren't filtered, and eventually do end up in our waterways. So we have some maple syrup to represent oil, and of course we're usually gonna find that along our roads. So we'll just do a light drizzle here. And we mentioned our harbor area has some boats, and it's gonna be in the water too, because the boats are obviously in the water. And then a little in our neighborhood area as well, right along that road. And so it's really important that if we're washing our cars, we want to do it actually on grassy areas so it doesn't run into those storm drains on pavement, or taking it to a car wash because they are regulated and they have to dispose of waste properly. So when we're talking about pollutants, we're talking about 2 main types. We're talking about point source pollutants and non-point source pollutants. And the easiest way to tell them a difference is kind of in the name. So a point source pollutant is something I can literally point at and say, that's where the pollutant is coming from. So something like a large pipe that's disposing waste into a waterway, because I can point at that pipe and say that's where the waste is coming from. A non-point source pollutant is a little tricky because that can be something that's pretty much out of sight, and a lot of people have that mentality: out of sight, out of mind, we shouldn't care about it. But those are really dangerous. So an example of that would be, I might be on the beach, but further upstream, that farm, all that excess sediment and fertilizer going into the waterway, ending down at the beach, is an example of a non-point source, because I can't exactly pinpoint where it's coming from. I have a general idea, but that's why it's really important that we're not just regulating what's going on at the coast, but we're regulating what's going on even further inland. So now that we have all of our pollutants, what's going to happen, especially since it's the summertime here, we have afternoon thunderstorms, and those can happen all across the state. And so we have our spray bottle here representing that rainfall, and what we're going to do is just spray along our Enviroscape here. It's going to be raining on the farm quite a bit, raining in the middle of our city on those roadways. We're going to spray on our construction site and down in our neighborhood. And then we're going to come closer to the coast in our marina. It's going to be raining really hard there. And then over to our resort down right on the beachfront, we have a large storm coming in. And these can continue for several hours every single day during the summertime, so it's definitely not unusual, especially here in coastal Virginia, even further inland in Virginia. So now our storm has halted. Okay. And so what we can see going on is quite a lot, okay? So over in our neighborhood area, we had a lot of fertilizer represented by that Kool-Aid coloring, that dark purple. And as you can see, it's made its way down the roadway into our harbor and eventually down into our ocean. And you can actually see it moving, and that would be how it would move in our waterways, especially with the currents that we have and the tidal changes that we have. You can even see some of the oil had dripped down into the harbor, so that's going to sink. And oil can even be found at the deepest parts of waterways. It can be found right at the surface, so oil is a huge problem. Over here we had a beautiful little estuary located here with some oysters. So some of that fertilizer and sediment from our farming area went down right into our estuary, so you can see a lot of that dark purple. Estuaries can absorb some of the excess nutrients, and that can be a good thing, especially for our ocean, so it doesn't end up quite there. But of course, we don't want to pollute our estuaries or have them do that in the first place. And then over in our resort area, you can see a lot of that blue, so a lot of that litter that happened. It can wash down onto roads, which wash down into storm drains and into the ocean. And then right on our beautiful coastline, there's a lot of trash there. So if you are on the beach, we want to make sure that we're picking up our trash as we go, making sure we leave no trace. So we want to keep our spaces nice and beautiful. So as you can see, you know, pollutants that are from construction sites to farms to golf courses to neighborhoods to our downtown areas to our beaches all result in a lot of pollutants. And unfortunately, with the geography of watersheds, they end up in our waterways. And there are things that we can do, obviously, to prevent that from happening. So education is a great tool for that, and making it a really good visualization for people to learn about. And it's definitely something that we're working on, a lot of policies being put in place, but it does start with kind of our day-to-day behavior. So like I mentioned, with taking your cars to car washes or washing them on the grass, picking up after ourselves. If you are working on farms or working in construction sites, making sure you're abiding by rules with what you can use and what you can't use, because it can be toxic to the environment, because we don't want a huge mess like this to happen. So I hope this was kind of a good demonstration to show you guys how things that happen hundreds of miles from the coastline can still affect our coastline quite a bit.